Episode 19. After the show, don't forget to visit tell.fish/gear to get our recommendations on gear that will take your angling adventures to the next level and help make you the next Telltale Fisherman.
Welcome to the Telltale Fisherman podcast, where avid anglers share the story of their best fishing day ever to inspire yours. Now it's time for another epic adventure. So here's your host, John Woodson.
Well, welcome to the show. Today's guest is Captain Lonney Goman from Green Bay Trophy Fishing. Captain Lonney, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm great, and it's great to have you on here. And I've been looking at a lot of your epic posts that you've been putting on social media and Instagram, and seeing a lot of cool fishing you do up there in your area that I'm excited to talk about here shortly. But before we get into the fishing that you do now, talk to us a little bit about how you got the fishing bug. I mean, did you grow up fishing, or where did your love for fishing come from?
I grew up fishing. I just loved it as a young boy. It was already built right into me. I actually grew up in Goman, Wisconsin. It's a little town between Green Bay and Sturgeon Bay. It's right on Lake Michigan. Mm-hmm. I grew up fishing on the piers, casting for big Chinook salmon, June, July, August.
Okay.
So I got, a love of fishing already back in 5th, 6th, 7th grade.
Right. And then is it something you kept up with as you went through school and just gravitated right on into guiding, or?
Exactly. So I started fishing on the Green Bay side. If anyone knows, between, you got Wisconsin and there's the thumb called the Door County Peninsula. So we have world-class freshwater fishing. You have the Green Bay side, which is a basin of Lake Michigan. Mm-hmm. And that's a little bit more shallower in Lower Green Bay, where that holds a lot of walleye and smallmouth bass.
Okay.
And, Lake Michigan is deep and cold, where most of the trout and salmon are. So I had the best of both worlds. You had walleye, perch, and bass on the Green Bay side, and you had the salmon and trout on the Lake Michigan side. So as a young boy, we got to beat both sides up fishing multi-species freshwater.
Yeah, well, you got a lot of great species there too. And so that was one thing I really wanted to ask you is how, you've got some tremendous open water up there. I mean, it's like a whole ocean of fresh water, those lakes you have. And I was just wondering, how do you decide, when you're going to be inshore in the bays and when you're going to go offshore?
The bay is so big. If you want to really be a good multi-species fisherman and dial in, I like to dial in on bass, walleye, and muskie, mm-hmm. and some northern pike. So, bass and walleye are seasonal. Obviously, you got spring when ice goes out. You have that late April, early May. In Wisconsin, the fishing season opens the first weekend in May. And that first couple weeks is just phenomenal for bass and walleye. They're spawning what we call the pre-spawn phase. They're on the shoreline, so you target your shorelines. Mm-hmm. Any kind of a rocky break, shoreline break is really good. Those are transition areas where the fish slide up and they do their thing in terms of spawning. And those are times that they're a little more vulnerable. You can catch them. And, a lot of shoreline fishing, for example, trolling, casting, jigging, all works really well for good techniques. Mm-hmm. And then from spring, you kind of transfer into a post-spawn pattern or an early summer pattern for bass and walleye.
Okay.
That's when they get a little more finicky. Or actually, they'll put the feed bag on, and then they kind of go into a midsummer pattern, mm-hmm. the bass and walleye, where they get a little more finicky, like I just said earlier.
Yeah.
Because after full spawn, they get really, really hungry. They just got done spawning. They want to eat. The water temperatures are warming up. Bass and walleye are both cold-blooded. So they're almost kind of like a lizard or a snake. The warmer they get, their metabolism speeds up a little bit. So they get more hungry, and that makes sense when you get into late June, July, and August. The water temperature is usually warming at 70 to mid-70 on the surface, not saying it's that down below.
Right.
But they get pretty good appetites to where they need to eat. So those are good times to fish.
do you favor casting with lures at one point versus trolling at other points, or how do you decide what you're going to do on a given day when you go out?
Yeah, it's all usually based on customer preference. So you get customers that just want fish for a fish fry. A lot of times it's troll, because trolling is an effective way. You put offshore planer boards out with trolling rods. You can usually put 4 lines per side, and you're really covering water. I call it covering real estate. And you're kind of beating up key areas like, say, a reef, a rocky point you go over that holds fish, a shoreline break. These are all key areas that hold walleye. And, and a lot of times guys want to catch walleyes jigging or casting. And some of the techniques we use casting are ripping wraps. They're a casting bait in your back. They're almost like a rattle trap. They got a lot of they're reactionary type strike bait. And then also what's really popular now is a jigging wrap and a moonshine shiver minnow. Those were conventionally or originally used for ice fishing. Now guys are casting those, and especially in Door County, the Sturgeon Bay area, it's clear water up there, so those fish locate those baits pretty quickly. And when you can get into walleyes, especially 10-plus pounders that way, that's just an incredible way to fish when they crush that bait.
Oh yeah. Now, do you notice a difference in the way the fish fight when you're catching them on casting? Casting with lures versus when you're getting them trolling?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone says, when you reel a walleye and trolling, it feels like you're reeling in a sock. Well, I disagree with that. Once you take that planer board off and you got a good sized walleye on, say 22 to 24 inches, boy, they're scrappy. They really are. However, as a general rule of thumb, I would agree with that. Yeah, you get something casting or jigging, they're a lot more scrappier. I mean, they'll rip that line out a couple times on your drag.
Yeah.
And you trolling, you got 10, 12-pound tests. You're reeling them in behind a planer board. You just can't reel them in. You gotta kind of reel them in with finesse. So lately, walleyes have really hard mouths, but that skin around their mouth is usually where the hook's kind of in bed. And if you reel that walleye in real fast trolling, you got to imagine you're going a mile to a mile and 3/4 an hour. Plus, you're trying to crank that board in. You rip them lures right out of those walleyes' mouths. So the tournament guys over the years it's an unconventional way to reel a walleye in, but they actually take the rod tip and they put it down towards the water and they reel it in really slow. So the walleye almost kind of swims with you, and you keep that fish in the water, because if that walleye starts splashing on top, 80% of the time they'll pop off.
Yeah.
So it's a tournament technique where they keep that rod tip in the water, they reel it in slow, or we like to reel the walleye in slow. And just when I'm ready to net it, I have the customer or the client lift that rod tip up real slow, and then we net them. And it's a really good way to put more walleyes in the boat.
We've been talking about the open water fishing here, but you do ice fishing as well, right?
Yeah, I just love ice fishing. I think in my previous life I was half polar bear. I just love ice fishing. I love the challenge of pulling a big walleye up through the hole, or we catch a lot of whitefish out in 100 feet of water in a really deep area in Green Bay where they like to congregate through the winter. Whitefish are just a great fish to eat. They're in the cisco family, but they got a white firm meat, and they're just as close to walleye as far as I'm concerned.
Nice. Well, when we get back, Captain Lonney is going to share an epic ice fishing story with us. Stay tuned. Here's a tip for you about sunscreen. I noticed that many of my sun shirts that I use for fishing were getting nasty rust-colored stains on them around the hand and neck areas. Unfortunately, it would not wash out no matter what I tried, and we all know those pretty fishing shirts are not cheap. As it turns out, that staining is caused by an additive which is in many sunscreens, especially the spray-on kinds that I used to use often. Thankfully, there is a brand of sunscreen that is specially formulated without that additive, so now those pretty shirts stay picture perfect. Check out our gear page at www.tell.fish/gear. We have a link to this sunscreen for you there. Okay, we are back, and just before the break, we were just starting to get into ice fishing with Captain Lonney, and he's now going to tell us a epic ice fishing adventure that you had, correct?
I am. I don't know, but if I tell you, I think people are going to think I'm crazy. But so the last couple winters haven't been that warm. I mean, January's good. We get some ice. Typically, we get 24 to 30 inches of ice every year. And we had a really warm February last year, to where it would get freezing, but it was warming up, and we had a huge pressure crack open up.
Really?
The south wind opened the crack up maybe 100 to 200 yards. And mind you, we're out 100 feet of water.
Mm-hmm.
And how were we going to get our ice houses? So I used to work construction and build bridges, and we used a lot of barges that you drive the cranes onto. So I had a thought, well, if I get some chainsaws and I cut out a big barge out of the ice and float a gear back across this 200-foot crack, I thought we could get all our gear and equipment. So I got a 12-foot John boat with a 10-horse. I took all the gear and equipment over in this 200-foot wide-open crack that was our gear and all our ice houses and equipment was on the other side. I ended up cutting a 20 by 30 ice barge, and all this ice was probably about 10 to 12 inches thick. We pushed all our houses on, our UTVs, a few at a time, and I would have a rope on each side. And we had a crew of guys, and we hooked another UTV to pull this ice barge across. It was quite the operation, but we basically floated all our gear across this crack. And mind you, we were in close to 100 feet of water. If something would have slipped off, it would have had a long fall to the bottom.
Oh, my goodness.
However, we had someone looking out for us, but we got all our gear and equipment back, and we helped with the competitors as well get their gear and equipment back. And it was quite the story. We had the news media there, and we had guys filming and checking this all out. No one has ever done this before, so it was quite a epic story. And you just had to be there and experience it to, because we didn't know how we were going to get our gear back. And, there was big storms coming in, and, we had to get our gear closer to shore so we didn't lose it, because, you got $3,000 into an ice house the way we build them, heavy runners, and they're all custom built with pole barn steel. They're spray foamed. You start talking 10 ice houses out there, that's $30,000, and you definitely don't want to lose that.
No,
so,
hey, plus you said ATVs and stuff, right?
We had UTVs, and these are 6 passengers. They're the big dogs.
The big ones. Yeah, those aren't cheap either.
No, you got $20,000 into a UTV, and just when Green Bay usually freezes over, but when you have a warm winter, the lower half freezes, and the middle part of Green Bay freezes, but the upper half is wide open. So when you got wind, it swirls that ice around, and that's how pressure cracks are formed, and they open and close. That's why the Green Bay and the Great Lakes ice fishing can be dangerous. So.
Wow. So I presume you go out and test the ice and everything before you take your houses out there and do all those kinds of safety checks first?
Yes. Our best friend is always a satellite photo. Now with the new satellite, we can just see how far the ice is froze up Green Bay. Typically the whole bay freezes in, all the way up to Little Bay and Big Bay to Knock in northern Door County. So that keeps that ice from swirling around and pressure cracks from opening and closing. But like I say, they claim, the climatologists claim that in the winter of 15, we had just a heck of an El Nino, one of the worst in history in terms of warmth. And if you remember, the winter of 16, then, there was residuals of the ocean temperature still kind of being warm in 17, the beginning of 17 here. So that's why, I don't know if you remember, but here in the Green Bay area, that from that third weekend, or I should say the last week of February, we had almost 60 degrees. I mean, that's unheard of in February.
Oh, yeah.
There's always a February warm up, but our ice went to heck pretty quick the last week of February. So based on the summer we're having and what the climatologists are saying, we're hoping to have a good, long, cold winter. So we're looking forward to it.
You don't hear many people pray for a good, long, cold winter, except the hardcore ice fishermen, I think.
You got her.
Well, wow. I was, as you were describing that, I'm sitting there thinking of those UTVs and all that equipment on that ice that you're ferrying across there, and just thinking, oh my gosh, what would happen if that thing teetered or tipped and all that stuff went down to the bottom? That would be terrible.
It would be. We just gambled, and we felt pretty good about the ice barge. Actually, we tested it with just 1 or 2 ice houses on there. At worst, if they would have let off, I think they would have floated, because they had wood runners. They were completely spray foamed, so we could have hooked a rope up to them and pulled them back across. I don't know how we would have got them on the existing ice, but we would have probably figured something out. But we tested a couple of them coming across, and then we went and got a big load and loaded them down and brought them across. And heck, it was just like a barge or a big chunk of ice floating that we could manage with a rope on each side, and we just pulled it back and forth. It was an all-day process, but let me tell you, it was well worth it once we got all our gear back.
Oh, I bet you breathed the world's biggest sigh of relief when all that equipment was safe.
Yes.
Well, wow, that really is pretty amazing, and not at all what I was expecting in an ice fishing story. But before we let you go here, just tell us a couple of your most epic ice fishing catches, some of the really awesome, amazing days you've had ice fishing that stand out to you.
Yeah, we've had some really big walleyes, that 32, 33-inch mark. And, all fishermen tell a little lies, but these were all legit fish. These were all 32 to 33-inch walleyes.
Wow. Yeah.
13.5 pounds. And for Green Bay, those are big walleyes.
Mm-hmm.
Those are big walleyes anywhere in the country. I know Lake Winnipeg up in Manitoba, they do really well for big walleyes, those greenbacks. But there's a few other places. But Green Bay is one of the top 5 in the nation, probably the North America for trophy walleyes. And we've caught some amazing big walleyes, some really big pike where you think you got a walleye on and you pull up, a 40, 45-inch northern pike on 8-pound test with a jigging wrap. Luckily that northern pike is caught in the corner of the mouth, so he doesn't snap your line.
Well, I was going to say, how do you reach your hand down there and pull that big mouth of teeth up through the ice?
Well, you wouldn't realize the challenge when you got 16, 18, 20 inches of ice and you got a log underneath there, and he's still fighting, and you got to turn that fish up and get him up that hole. That's a challenge in itself right there. And you don't want to stick the gaff down there and start gaffing in his gills because you don't want to kill the fish,
right,
just in case you release them. So there's an art to it, and you just got to kind of just be patient. I've busted off enough big fish in my younger days to realize you got to tell yourself to slow down. Because every time you get that head in the hole and you start to kind of nurse them up the hole, and he wants to take off, you got to let him go. Because that second you just put a little extra pressure on that line, especially a big northern pike, you're going to snap off. So.
Wow. Yeah, it's slow and steady, but you're out there and you're cold and your heart's beating. You got all that adrenaline pumping. That's probably the hardest thing in the world to do is back off and let them go slow.
Exactly, and it's patience and coaching, and that's a lot what we do as ice guides too. People come out and their clients come out, and all we can do is coach, teach, tell them what we would do, and that's what I guess they're hiring us for. But on top of it too, you let the client also do what they want to do, and
right.
I've so many guys bust off big walleyes, big pike, open water, and ice fishing because just recently we had an honest to God 52 to 54-inch muskie on open water on a little 10-pound rod with a flicker minnow, Berkeley flicker minnow, and it was caught right in the corner of its mouth. And this thing was huge. The girth on it was incredible. We got a video of it. That being said, we fought it for about a half hour, 40 minutes, and then the guy got a little impatient. He went to lift up on his rod. He just did one of these with its head, just shook it, and he busted the line.
Wow.
So,
that was a heartbreaker, but cool to see the fish anyway.
We got to see the fish, so I've seen plenty of heartbreakers, like you just said, over the years. And but you win some, you lose some. You're not going to win everyone, but when you do win one, it is unbelievable feeling to catch a monster trophy fish. Oh,
absolutely, and you and your clients never forget it.
No, not at all. That's what it's called, making memories. And
yep.
That's blessed to be on Green Bay. Green Bay is just a healthy, unbelievable fishery for trophy class fish as well as eater class fish. It's just definitely a destination place. At least on a bucket list that everyone should at least try once.
Yeah, well, I'm sold. I hope I can get up there one day, and if I can get brave enough coming from Florida to do it and do that ice fishing, that would be pretty neat too. It's gonna be hard for me to adjust to that cold, but man, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we got nowadays we take all that out of it though. I mean, ice fishing sounds cold, but We have a bar and grill we run out of. You show up, yeah, it can have lunch, breakfast. Depending on the time of the day you come out, we take you out to heated ice houses. There's almost like sitting in your living room with a floor in it. You fish in the hole. You can turn the heat up. Yeah, it's just awesome. You take the ride in on a plowed road back to the heated to the bar and grill. Maybe have a shot and a beer. You warm up and you go back to your hotel. And we have all the amenities that it takes to make you comfortable and catch fish.
Awesome. Well, I like the sound of that. Captain, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. That was awesome to talk to you today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate that.
Do you know someone who would be a great guest on the Telltale Fisherman? If so, go to tell.fish/guest and recommend them for the show. We won't bug them. We'll just give them the chance to share the story of their lifetime and become a fishing legend. Visit tell.fish/guest.
This has been the Telltale Fisherman podcast. Thanks for sharing another great tale with us. Be sure to check out the show notes page for more info on today's show and the gear we talked about. Keep those lines tight, and we'll catch you next time right here on the Telltale Fisherman podcast.